Okay, I think we're good to go. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of our Virtual Tech webinar series. It's my great pleasure today to be introducing Josh Goldberg, who's going to be talking today about configuring ESLint and Prettier for TypeScript. Before we dive in, just a quick word from our sponsors. So this meetup today is brought to you by LogRocket. The vast majority of you tuning in today will probably have come from the blog, but you may not know that we actually have a great product for when you're building and fixing applications. So LogRocket is a front-end application monitoring solution that combines error tracking, performance monitoring, infrastructure monitoring, and web analytics. It's all rolled into one solution, so your engineering and your product teams can all use a single source of truth to look at all of these different aspects of app development. This allows for more efficient remediation of problems and iteration of feature sets, in addition to its integration with all of your existing backend monitoring tools. For more information, head over to logrocket.com and you can get a personalized demo, or you can sign up with a free account and just get a taster for what it can do for you. I would like to just tip my hat in the direction of some future meetups that we have that you may be interested in. So we have on November 10th, Understanding Reactive Microservices with Jay Hipster. On November 21st, Scaling the Testing Pyramid with TypeScript. And November 28th, Learn how to make a 360 VR video in Unity. If you're interested in signing up for more meetups, you can just follow the link in the slide right here, or you can just Google Virtual Tech Meetups LogRocket, and it'll be the first thing that comes up. Now, with all of that out of the way, I'd like to welcome Josh to do his talk. And just a reminder to everybody that a recording of this session will be sent to you via email after the conclusion of the webinar. Now, with all that out the way, take it away, Josh.
Thank you very much. And hi, everyone. Thanks, Jack. I'm excited to talk to you today about TypeScript and ESLint and Prettier. These are a few things that tend to get confused a lot. So I'm real pumped that we can try to shed some light on how they all work together. Let me just go ahead and share screen. Everything that I'm going to talk to you today about is available online. And I'm going to post these in the chat. The repo that we're going to be working in is on my GitHub, LogRocket, ESLint, Prettier, TypeScript. Again, I just sent it to the chat. And a final version that has today's stuff, along with a few other, what I like to call bells and whistles, is also on GitHub under my repo, under my organization template TypeScript node package. I'm going to be covering 3 areas of configuration today that all blend together and work well together. We're going to be covering TypeScript, the language that all of our code is going to be written in. We're going to cover Prettier, which is the formatter. And oh, thank you, Jack, for posting in the chat. And we're going to be covering ESLint, which is a static analysis linter for TypeScript, meaning it looks at your code and gives you complaints, potentially with auto fixes, without running it. You can get started by git cloning this repo locally, and I would encourage you to play along at home as I'm doing this stuff, although you certainly don't have to. The repo right now is pretty blank, so we're going to be filling it out together. It just has a license and a README with a few links. The first thing to do when you're setting up a node package is make a package.json. And I'm just going to put a few quick pieces of information there. Author is, let's just say Josh Goldberg, PM at joshuagoldberg.com. And I'm going to add a dependency. Now you can either add a dependency through the command line. Let me just maximize this with something like npmi TypeScript save dev, or if you use a nice editor that has fun features the way VS Code does, you can do something like dependencies, TypeScript, or rather dev dependencies, TypeScript, and then wait for it to autocomplete the version, which is my preferred way because I enjoy that. Also, as Jack says, I also want to call out, I'm going to just keep going through all these things. Please do ask any questions in the Q&A. I'll try to answer them in real time if they're relevant and something that we should talk about, or if not, if we should talk about in the moment, and then anything else that gets left over, I will try to answer at the end. I've also seen people question, what is the difference between dependencies and dev dependencies? Dependencies is anything that you want to get packaged along with your package when you publish it. Dev dependencies is stuff that on top of those should be available when you develop locally. So typically TypeScript is a dev dependency because you don't need people to also download and install TypeScript when they run most packages. That's a development time tool. TypeScript is a programming language and a set of tools around that language, not something you would use at runtime for the most part. So when we add dependencies TypeScript, we are saying, I want TypeScript to be available for me as a developer while working on this package. Cool. You can use any package manager you want, npm or yarn or pnpm or others. I'm sure they exist. For now, I'm just going to use npm because it's the one that everyone should have locally with Node. And immediately we see after npm installing my added one package, I have 193 changes in my source control. I have package lock.json, package.json, and then a whole bunch of stuff in my node modules. That's because by default, Git does not ignore anything, but we should ignore the node modules directory from Git. There are some projects that check in node modules, but that's out of scope for this workshop. Now that we're ignoring node modules in our git ignore, I'm going to say that's our first pause point. Git add all, git commit installed dev dependency TypeScript, and git push. Hooray! I'm going to keep doing these pushes throughout the workshop. So if there's ever anything you're confused about, you want to see the code that I'm writing, feel free to check it out on the repo on github.com/JoshuaKGoldberg/logrocket ESLint Prettier TypeScript. And in case you haven't inferred it by now, I will explicitly say we are doing this from scratch. So there might be some small hiccups if I mistype a command somewhere. But for the most part, I want to show y'all the experience of building up a repository from nothing to a fully fledged TypeScript ESLint Prettier setup. Cool. Now that we've installed TypeScript, it's time to start using it. I tend to write my source files in a directory called source or src. So I'm just going to do a console.log hello world. And I cannot run this file immediately because it's in TypeScript. It's the TypeScript syntax. Now, in theory, we can do node source index.ts, and it just coincidentally works because so far we haven't written any TypeScript specific syntax. But if we do something like export type haha equals true, and then try to run it in Node, Node would complain. Oops. First of all, we're using export syntax, and that's too new for Node. I'll cover that in a bit. Second of all, we're using specific TypeScript syntax, which Node doesn't understand. In order to compile this index file into a JS file, we're going to need to call TypeScript, which I typically do under a build script, build tsc. In your package.json, you can have a list of scripts as key value pairs, and then run any of those scripts. npm run build runs the tsc script, which is the TypeScript command line. However, by default, tsc doesn't do anything. It just shows you a bunch of utilities or common commands you can run with it because you need to configure TypeScript. TypeScript needs to know on what files it's supposed to run and with what settings. With npm run scripts, you can pass in after a -- a list of flags or command line options. For example, you can pass in index.ts to have it build, source index.ts. There we go. And now in our source, we have an index.js. Note how the TypeScript specific syntax here is removed, and we just have the JS syntax. If you're not too familiar with TypeScript yet, that's okay. I'm not going to cover the specifics of what a type is or how type inference works. Just know that TypeScript files contain JavaScript syntax plus some new stuff that gets spit out, trimmed out when you turn it into JS. I will also note that our source/index.js is being tracked by Git, which we don't want. So I'm going to also add source **/star.js to our Git ignore, so that no more source files or source directory files with .js as their extension are allowed. All right. Now, in order to run our files, we need to have a main that tells Node that if someone were to import our package, say require parentheses log rocket dash ... TypeScript, there would be a particular file that gets run as the main. So here, if someone in theory were to run node and then x equals required, the path to log rocket ESLint and Prettier TypeScript, the thing that would get given back to them is the results of running the index.js file. And you can see that because I've run require on the current directory, it's as if someone is requiring or importing my package, which means we console log hello world. In fact, if we do that again, and I'm just going to say module.exports.hello equals world, and then require dots, we see that in addition to logging hello world, we also get that nice hello :world module export. So hooray! Someone could, in theory, import our package if we were to publish it. Though publishing does require a version. So let's go ahead and add, say, 001. Now, I'm a big fan of modern features and using the latest and greatest for everything. So instead of using the old CommonJS exports format, I'm actually in my index.ts file going to say export const value for hello equals world. And then if we rerun build on it, we get TypeScript to do some magic to compile this down to what looks like CommonJS. Now, actually, I don't really want this to be in CommonJS. I want to be in module ESNext. I think it is. There we go. Export var hello equals world. So now we have a build output using this lovely little build command. We're saying to TypeScript, well, first build using TSC. We are going to build the source index file, and then the module we're going to use is ESNext, meaning the output module is ESNext instead of, say, CommonJS. So that's CommonJS. This is ESNext. If you're not familiar with JavaScript modules, that's okay. There is a whole bunch of stuff from old module formats, such as CommonJS, the one that Node uses by default. And now we have a new unified module format, ECMAScript modules or ES modules. And I'm going to go ahead and say in my package that I use the ES modules for module by default. So now when someone requires the package, say require dot, oh boy, I can no longer require it, but I can import dot. Huh. Pardon me. The REPL is a little, here we go. You know what, I'm just going to give up on that. Well, we have stopped people from being able to require dot, but now we are using the nice proper new ECMAScript module syntax. And one last thing I want to note before committing is that this is a long build command. I don't want to have to memorize that or put it in the README. So I'm actually going to make a tsconfig.json file where I store the compiler options, module ESNext. So now if we run npm run build, it'll pick up that there's a tsconfig file and run on all TS files in our current directory, excluding node modules, which is great. Just to, whoops, I hit the wrong thing. Just to show that this is updating, hi, yay, npm run build, we get the updated output. Yay. So to recap, we have changed our package from a CommonJS one, the default, to ECMAScript modules, the fancy new thing in Node, by adding in type module and telling our tsconfig that our module is ESNext. We've added a build script that runs tsc. We've added an index file, and locally we can see that there is a source/index.js created as a result. We have mostly configured TypeScript now. Initial TypeScript config. There are a few more flags that I want to cover with TypeScript. One is the target flag. You may have noticed that we have slightly changed the JavaScript syntax in creating our index.js. The original file used const, while the output file uses var. For those who haven't used old JavaScript before, there are a lot of older ways of doing things in JavaScript that have been replaced or augmented with new ways. For example, we no longer need to declare variables with var, which has weird scoping semantics. We can then instead use let or const. But TypeScript by default downpiles or transpiles to an older version of ECMAScript or JavaScript any code that it's given. By default, it sets its target to ES3, which is the oldest supported JavaScript that it could care about. But we want to output to newer JavaScript. There's no need to support ES3 anymore, or even ES5. Fun fact, the vast majority of users are running on evergreen or constantly updated environments. And you can, unless you're supporting weird old legacy users, probably use ES 2021 and almost certainly use ES 2020 as your target. If we run npm run build again, after changing our target to ES 2020, we see that our output is const. And I'm getting a little annoyed here because I keep having to run build. So I'm going to actually add a -- watch flag in my terminal, which will run build in watch mode. npm run build space -- space -- watch, or just -w. Starting compilation in watch mode, found 0 errors, watching for file changes. Now you can see in glorious real time as I switch my target round and round, we get different JavaScript output. And if you want to see some really fun stuff here, declare an async function, hello, that like return awaits promise.resolve. Hi. Ooh, what is this complaining about? Oh, it's a duplicate identifier test. Here we go. And you can see the glorious amount of stuff that TypeScript adds in order to support older JavaScript runtimes. If we were to change our target ES3, we get a full shim or working version of generator code, which is a JavaScript language feature that async await is built on. But if we switch up to ES 2021, let's say, we see that TypeScript is just outputting async and awaits natively. The runtime it's targeting supports it, so it doesn't need to downpile or transpile to an older JS version. So that's great. That means we can commit. Target ES 2021. I will again note that I'm just barreling forward with all this stuff, so please let me know if there's anything that you wanted to ask about, if there's anything unclear, any little edge cases in TypeScript you'd like more information on. I'm going to try to spend roughly a third of an hour on each of TypeScript, Prettier, and ESLint. Prettier is going to go a little short, ESLint is going to go a little long. A little bit more on TypeScript. I'm not going to go too deep into these, but a few more flags. ES module interop true is often a good idea. Because there were two different module formats, CommonJS and ES modules, that a lot of packages might need to support one or both of, sometimes there's a weird discrepancy between one or the other, and it can be difficult for your code to correctly import a package. ES module interop tells TypeScript to assume that you are using some sort of runtime like Webpack or Vite that massages that a little bit and makes it easier for you. By the way, if you ever get curious about these flags, you can always hover over them in your editor to get the link. Didn't know I didn't trust TypeScript lang. And you get taken to this beautiful page, typescriptlang.org/tsconfig. You can also find this page from aka.ms/tsconfig, which takes you straight to the page. And then you can search ts module interrupt, for example, to see how these flags change, how TypeScript changes your code. Most of these flags will do one or both of changing how TypeScript reports type errors and or changing how TypeScript emits code. In this case, ES module interrupt, it massages how TypeScript imports star as versus require as, because that's a whole slight change between CommonJS and ES modules. I'm also going to add the flag skip libcheck. Skip libcheck tells TypeScript not to run type checking on DTS files that come in your node modules. By default, TypeScript will check your node modules and make sure the no type error is there. However, that's oftentimes not useful for two reasons. One, a lot of bigger packages have a lot of node modules which may conflict with each other, have conflicting versions, or modify global variables in their type definitions in some weird way. So you sometimes just need to disable them. It also takes longer for TypeScript to type check the more files it has to. So anything you can do to trim down that list, say removing node modules from it, is good and useful. So skip libcheck is nice. I'm actually blanking on if there are any other files that I want to show you any config options I'd want to show you. So I'm going to go ahead and check the template repo. Yes, a few more. And by the way, under the template TypeScript node package, you can always check blob main tsconfig.json. Let's see. Declaration is great. Declaration tells TypeScript to generate a DTS file for each of your source files. So I have created index.ts, and now, since I've enabled declaration, there's also an index.dts. These DTS files, or declaration or definition files, are how TypeScript can be told how JavaScript runtime packages work. Meaning, if you publish a package to NPM, you're generally publishing the JS files. These DTS files can then tell any consumer who's using TypeScript how those JS files look. For those of you who do use TypeScript, this may be obvious to you or important. For those of you who haven't yet used TypeScript, trust me, this is a very good thing and a big deal. So highly recommend turning on declaration true for your files. I also am a big fan of declaration map true and source map true. Source map turns on source maps so that someone using a debugger can visually view the TypeScript files as the source. It tells editors such as VS Code and other debuggers such as Chrome how to visually display the source file when someone is debugging through the compiled output. And declaration map is a little complex to explain, but it creates a source map equivalent for DTS files that go back to the original TS source file. So when you're using IDE features such as go to definition for packages, it means that as a consumer, you're able to look through the original source code, which can be useful instead of looking at the compiled output DTS. These, again, if you're not familiar with TypeScript, we can gloss over this. But if you are using TypeScript, it is sometimes quite useful. And here we see index.dts, index.js.map, the contents of which we don't need to dive into deeply, and then another map file for the DTS. This is all looking good, but I don't want to check in my DTS or map files. So I'm going to git ignore DTS and also .map files. Status now shows just the git ignore and the tsconfig. Yay. I'm going to commit these. Create source and declaration. Okay, a couple more to go over. You don't need to set outdir. In my template node package, I created a dist directory just to keep things separate, but you don't have to. Outdir tells TypeScript to shove everything that it outputs into a specific directory. By default, outdir is whatever your source directory is, the lowest down common directory of all your source files, which in this setup got inferred to be source. So that's not something we need to focus on now. But here we see one of my favorite flags, strict. TypeScript is very configurable. It can be configured not just to understand different JavaScript modules or whether to output source maps, but it can also change how strict its type checking is. It's not strict by default, meaning it is permissive by default, but it can be told to be more strict with a large set of options. The most important option there is strict null checking. Let's say you have a with name or a greet name function, name string, I name.to uppercase, and you do greet name and pass in a value that might be undefined. So math.random greater than 0.5, Josh, undefined. This is what a lot of folks call the $1 billion mistake. If you've never heard of it before, I will tell you it is believed to have cost at least $1 billion in software damage. The idea that you can pass in the equivalent of undefined or null in the language to somewhere that explicitly says it's supposed to take in a real type, something that's not null or undefined. If you instead set strict null checks specifically to be true, TypeScript will start yelling at you. It'll say, hey, argument of type string or undefined, the argument is something you give to a function, is not assignable to parameter of type string because type undefined is not assignable to type string. Which means you have to fix your code. Let's say you put in a blank anonymous placeholder or something. Strict null checks is one of several strict options that TypeScript has. You can go back to that aka.ms/tsconfig page, or just start typing in strict in your tsconfig compiler options, and you'll see a few of them. The strict command on its own enables all of them. But if you ever need to disable one, like let's say strict function types is too difficult to implement, which I won't get into now, then you can always disable that and leave all the other strict settings on. I highly recommend always enabling strict whenever possible. It's good for your code base and it lets TypeScript be as useful as possible. So I'm gonna commit this. Strict true. That's about all I wanted to cover with TypeScript. Let me know in the chat, in the Q&A, if there's anything else you'd want to cover. But with all that being said, I'm gonna move on to Prettier. Now, TypeScript is a language, meaning it's a set of syntax you're allowed to type in your source files. And TypeScript also comes with a set of development tools. It's got the TSC compiler that we're running in watch mode. It's got a set of language services that allow VS Code when you say hover over a variable to show that variable's value. Prettier is a separate tool that applies formatting to your code. The way Prettier works is kind of cute, I think. It reads in a source file or a piece of text. It parses it as an abstract syntax tree or AST, which is a representation of the contents of that file that does not care about formatting. Then Prettier prints the file back using just the AST and whatever Prettier settings you have. So I'm just going to add a whole bunch of weird looking white space to this file just to really mess with it. Save without formatting. And then I'm going to go to the Prettier docs because I can never remember the command that they have to get it started. There's docs. Man, their mobile views. Here we go. Install. Here we go. npm install save dev save exact Prettier, which tells npm to use the exact version. And then here we go, npx prettier dash dash write period, which says run the prettier CLI and write mode on all the files in my local directory. And voila, Prettier has rewritten a whole bunch of my files to be pretty. You may see that it normalized all my white spaces, limited my end lines to 1, moved things onto the same line when reasonable. Awesome. And that's a really useful command. So I'm actually going to add it to my scripts format. Prettier dash dash write. Now if I do npm run format, it should prettier write. So I missed the dot. Hitting the wrong shortcuts here. npm run format. There you go. Lovely. If you want, pardon my laptop, it's dying. If you want, you can always configure Prettier using prettier.rc.json. I'm going to copy the command there, prettier.rc.json. And then there are some options here. Now, my editor here is suggesting these options because I have the Prettier extension for VS Code installed. Highly recommend installing this extension. And in fact, if you're using VS Code, you can have add to workspace recommendations done for any extension that you find particularly useful. Now, if we go to .vscode/extensions.json, we can see that it's been added here. So anyone who opens this repo in VS Code will be prompted to install the Prettier extension. Highly recommend. It's great. Just as an example, I'm going to switch to tabs instead of spaces for accessibility reasons. And I'm going to npm run format again. I see a question, great question. What is the difference between installing the Prettier plugin and installing it as a dependency? Love the question. I will answer live. Okay, the dependency of your package JSON tells npm that it needs to be in your node modules folder as a package. Because it is in your node modules folder and listed as a script, that means that when you run npm run format, Prettier from your node modules is guaranteed to be in existence, to be available, and it'll run in your files. So whenever you run npm run format or npx Prettier, it'll run the node modules dependency. That is totally and completely separate from installing Prettier, the editor extension. The editor extension is something that'll run separately from your node modules, separately from your scripts, but it does modify your development experience just through your editor. And I'm actually going to show from the templates TypeScript node package some VS Code settings that are really useful here. I recommend switching your default formatter to Prettier and telling your formatter to be run on save. So I'm going to open another file here, vscode/settings.json. And I'm going to wrap these in JSON. So this is why, part of why an extension is really useful, because as you save a file, it can have Prettier run on it. So I'm going to save that formatting and hit save. And then we see that the file gets super nicely prettified whenever I hit save on it. So that's the difference between the dependency, which is something you can then run in the CLI, and a plugin or extension, which allows your editor to provide the features for you. I'm going to mark this as done, but please do ask another Q&A question if you think that that didn't sufficiently answer. Another one, I noticed the Prettier extension doesn't work without a Prettier RC. This isn't required when installing it with npm. Interesting. I have never actually tried to run without a Prettier RC, but let's see what happens. Still seems to work. I'm going to reload my window. Maybe it's a cached setting. You don't need a Prettier RC. Oh yeah, there we go. if you're using it from the CLI, I should say, but I guess you do need the pretty RC if you're using the extension. Okay, today I learned. Here, I'm going to put this file back. Your RC. Use tabs, true. There you go. All right, so we have configured Prettier most, but not all of the way that I will show. We've configured it to run on save in our editor. And we've also added a format, where's my package? A format script that we can run on demand whenever we want. So I'm going to commit that initial add of Prettier. There are a couple other times, places, ways that we want to run Prettier. A lot of people, myself included, really enjoy having Prettier as a commit hook. A commit hook is something that's run by Git on all your staged files when you try to make a commit. It's really useful for, say, auto-formatters to make sure that if someone modified a file and then didn't save in Prettier, or didn't save through Prettier, didn't format it, it still gets formatted. And because Prettier is so quick, it normally doesn't really irritate people too much. I've seen people have like the entire test suite of a repository run as a commit hook, and that takes a while and is very annoying. Would not recommend. So by the way, there is a set of recommendations on the Prettier website. My Chrome is freezing. That's unfortunate. I'm gonna close some tabs here. Ooh, oh boy. Pardon my computer. All right. Here we go. The pre-commit hook. Do I need to create a Prettier RC file even though the repo has the file.editor.config? I have never used an editor config file. I'm aware that they're in existence, but I do not know. That's like a totally separate tool. To my knowledge, Prettier does not read from an editor config, but if you have found some tool to let it do that, then jolly good. I really like lint staged, which is a tool that lets you run some commands on commit. So I'm going to copy and paste from the Prettier docs npx mrm@2 lint stage. I actually don't know what mrm stands for, but I have run this command enough times to feel confident in it. This is going to modify my package to add lint staged. Here we go, lint staged and husky as dependencies. This is, we don't really have to cover the exact difference between lint staged and husky, but the general idea is husky sets up your git commit hooks. There are files in your repo that are used for them. And then lint staged is what husky uses to call some commands. I actually disagree with the default lint stage settings. Here we see in our package, I am actually charging. It's just holding steady at 7 to 8%, but thank you, I appreciate it. I'll let you know if it gets below 6. The lint stage script will then run whatever is in your lint staged object here. So for every file that matches a JS, CSS, or MD description, when you commit, it'll have prettier -- write run on it. Actually, I'm just going to say, let's run prettier on everything and do prettier -- ignore unknown, which is a command that, a flag that Prettier can take in to say, ignore any unknown file. So if I say, check in a PNG file, Prettier won't try to auto format that. It wouldn't make sense. All right, so git status, git add all, we can actually see that we added a husky git ignore and a husky pre-commit. You don't have to dig into this, totally fine, but this pre-commit file is what's run as a part of your git hooks, and it says that we need to run the lint staged command. And notice one final piece of information before I summarize all this together. We now have a prepare script that says husky install. So going in order, when we npm install or npm I, husky install will get run because that's the way npm works. It runs the prepare script when you install. Husky will then install all of these commits, all these files such as .husky / pre-commit as git hooks. It'll then Git will then be configured to run whatever is in these files on those respective hooks, such as pre-commit, which means it'll know to run lint staged. Lint staged is what will run Prettier on our files. So Husky gets installed to run lint staged. Lint stage as a hook will run Prettier. Fortunately, none of us have to memorize any of what I just said, because if you ever need to set it up, it's on the Prettier pre-commit hook docs. But it's nice to know what all these tools do on the inside. Cool. So now if I run git add all, and I'm just going to add a change to my index file, let's add some spaces, save without formatting. And let's actually git add all again. Git commit added Prettier commit hook. Now, aha, we see in my commit preparing lint staged, running tasks for staged files, applying modifications from tasks, cleaning up temp files. Okay. And during that commit, you might have seen very quickly that it was running an index TS, but now we can see that that space got removed. Hit push. That's about all I will show for now on Prettier. I'm now going to move on to ESLint, unless anyone has any Q&A questions for it. ESLint is my favorite part of this to give because I work on some of the tooling that goes into it, and we're trying to make it more simple over time. All right, let's talk ESLint. We've covered TypeScript, which is the programming language we're writing in. It adds nice syntax and dev tooling around that syntax. And we've covered Prettier, which is auto formatting. Prettier doesn't care about your code logic. It doesn't care if your functions are named appropriately, if your variables are used or whatever. ESLint is a linter, and it cares somewhere in between those two things. In fact, I would say ESLint can be considered to be run on top of TypeScript or on top of JavaScript. ESLint doesn't just check whether things are 100% guaranteed or likely to be correct. It also checks for stylistic, for naming conventions, for likely bugs. And the tooling that lets you run ESLint on TypeScript code is TypeScript ESLint, the thing that I work on, the tooling that enables ESLint to support TypeScript. This is necessary because ESLint on its own only understands JavaScript syntax. By the way, I love their new homepage. They added this relatively recently. ESLint finds and fixes problems in your JavaScript code. It is not the same as TypeScript. It is a tool completely separate from TypeScript that does not understand TypeScript on its own. So if you want to run it with TypeScript, go to the TypeScript ESLint.io docs and add this lovely long command, which adds an unfortunately large number of packages, but I'll go through them in order. It adds TypeScript ESLint parser, TypeScript ESLint plugin, ESLint, and TypeScript as dependencies. So really, we're just adding two packages on top of ESLint. We're adding in a parser and an ESLint plugin. TypeScript ESLint/parser is what will be given to ESLint to be able to parse our TypeScript code. Because again, ESLint doesn't natively understand TypeScript code, but it can be configured to use a new different parser that can read in TypeScript. So just quickly going back to the page, we're going to create an ESLint config file, touch ESLint.rc.cjs. I'm going to copy and paste the contents of the file from the website. Alrighty. So this configuration right here on line 3 says parser TypeScript-ESLint/parser. Now ESLint will know to run using the TypeScript ESLint parser to be able to understand our code. So if I do npx ESLint source index ts, this should not throw an error, yay. And I'm also extending from the ESLint recommended rule set, more on the other things later. So if I have an unused variable that's a var, I do say var hello equals true, and I run ESLint on the file. Hooray, we get a complaint. Unexpected var used letter const instead. Now I've also left out a few points of configuration from the explanation. TypeScript ESLint has its own set of recommended rules. So we recommend that you, in your ESLint config, extend from ESLint recommended and plug in TypeScript ESLint recommended. This gives you the recommended set of rules for modern JavaScript / TypeScript code bases. Things like don't use var, use let or const. We also have a no unused vars rule in TypeScript ESLint, which by default gets configured to warning. It's a good warning to have though. And two more pieces of config to go through. We have the plugin TypeScript ESLint. That is the package that I installed, TypeScript ESLint / ESLint plugin. An ESLint plugin is a set of rules that are then made available to ESLint. By default, ESLint doesn't recognize any rules other than just the default ones that it comes with. By installing as a dependency TypeScript ESLint / ESLint plugin, you can now access rules such as our no unused variables rule and the extension list the config recommended. So that's really important and good and useful. Lastly, this root true flag here, this tells ESLint that this config is the root of a repo. So far in ESLint, you can put ESLint configs nested within subdirectories, like you might have one within a test directory or within a particular package. They're slowly going to be moving away from that system in the future, but for now, this root true is a good thing to have. It tells ESLint to stop looking for configs above this directory in your folder structure. All right, so we've added ESLint, we've added TypeScript ESLint so that it can run on our code, and we've added an intentional failure to our code. Commit now, initial ESLint. A few things on top of this. It's always good to have a package script. So I'm just going to add a script lint, ESLint dot that. So let me just make sure that's going to work. npm run lint. Aha. Now we are seeing that our ESLint on dot instead of index.ts is running on our JS files as well. And I actually forget how do I configure this in my other repo? So I believe there's an ESLint ignore file. Nope. Package JSON lints. Oh, you know what? We can ESLint ignore. Okay, so I'm going to touch .ESLint ignore, ESLint ignore, and star.js, I think it is. In the other one, we ignore the dist directory, but here we're doing them in line. Okay. So now we're ignoring a JS file because we only want to lint our TypeScript files. And fun fact, you can also run lints or ESLint in -- fix mode to tell it to auto fix anything that it can. Here I see we don't have any available auto fixing, but if we change this to let, then I'm betting that it'll give us a different complaint. You know what? Here we go. The issue is that I've named two variables the same thing. Okay. There we go. We have one error potentially fixable with the -- fix option. So if we do lint -- fix, it'll switch this to const. There we go. So that's so useful that though I don't always do this, I've seen repos do lint :fix with ESLint -- fix or npm run lint -- fix. So npm run lint fix. There you go. I also see that there is a warning. Now, the purpose of a warning in ESLint is kind of vague. Some people interpret it to be it's okay to have it. Some people think it's not okay. My personal philosophy is that you should only ever use warnings as a way to migrate to enabling the rule. That rule should basically always be errors. I've seen too many code bases where people leave a bajillion warnings in, and then developers get accustomed to seeing little yellow squigglies. It's a whole pain in the butt. I hate it. So I highly recommend either configuring all your rules to be errors or running with the -- max warnings 0 flag, which tells, oops, tells ESLint, as the name suggests, you're not allowed to have more than X warnings, and it'll exit with an error code if you have more than the maximum. Maximum 0 means any warning causes a failure. I also recommend the report unused disable directives flag. In fact, I added that one, where if you disable a lint rule and let's say later on change your code to no longer need it, ESLint will give you a complaint saying, hey, this disable next line is no longer necessary, so you can get rid of it. Fun fact, some people think that ESLint blocks the build. ESLint is never a build blocker because you can always disable a rule for a file on a particular line in a range in a file or just in your ESLint config altogether. If we say didn't want to use no unused vars, we could always put rules script ESLint no unused vars true or off. There we go. And then if we were to rerun again, we'd have 2 complaints about unused ESLint disable directives. So I never want to hear anyone say, oh, I couldn't possibly check this pull request in, ESLint is complaining. No, you can always disable ESLint on a per line, per file, per repo basis. Not that I recommend it, but those options are there. All right. I do see a couple of Q&As, very good questions. Let me just commit. Linting some more. My commit messages get worse as the workshops go on. There we go. Is it possible to configure ESLint to choose a parser depending on file extension? Yes, it is. In fact, some people have to do this with Vue because Vue has its own parser, which then may or may not need to call to TypeScript ESLint. It's doable with overrides. And this is actually quite common in ESLint configs. So you can override certain files. Let's say you want to .vue, and you can override to have a parser view. I forget what the view parser is called. So whatever it's called. Smiley face. This is actually pretty reasonable and common for people to use, not just to override the parser, but also to override your rules list. For example, in your test files, you might override the rules to say TypeScript ESLint no unsafe star unsafe any to be off. I forget. There are a few TypeScript ESLint rules that tend to conflict with tests. Excuse me. Specifically with the expect API from Jest and similar. So actually, you know what? I'm forgetting them. So let's go to the TypeScript ESLint docs and look at their rules. No unsafe misused. What is it? Dash any. Aha, here we go. No unsafe assignments or call, I think is the one. So let's say that you're writing tests and you're using expect and you're constantly getting complaints in your test files that you shouldn't about no unsafe call. You can always disable it for specifically your test files with an override. So I hope that answers the question. Let me know if there's more info you want there. Can you add a linter? Oops, answer live. Can you add a linter in the pre-commit book as well? Great question. Yes, you can. You can add whatever the heck you want in here. You could do star and then star.ts npm run lint, or just ESLint or something. I do not recommend this though. I do not recommend this for TypeScript projects or JavaScript because people get really annoyed when you have git commit hooks that take a while or may fail. The proper time to be running lint is at development time. And the proper time to be validating it is in your CI, which I haven't even gone into, but will soon. Having, say, GitHub Actions or Circle CI or similar verify. So you can do this. You can put whatever arbitrary command you want in lint stage, but I recommend keeping it to things that are very quick, nearly instantaneous, like Prettier. Good question. So I'm gonna just commit overrides and ESLint. Oops. Commit dash. Yep. The last thing that I will cover with linting before we show some actual CI workflows is type linting, because this is a very important thing and advantage that TypeScript ESLint gives. By default, ESLint, even when running with TypeScript ESLint, doesn't have access to type information, meaning it only sees the structure of the code. It doesn't understand what types things are. It wouldn't understand if you say import something from a package, what type that thing is. That's TypeScript information. But if you configure it to, it can run with a lot of much more powerful rules that can use that type information. I'm going to copy and paste some of this extra information here. Let's see. Set it to dot. And oh wait, no, dir name is fine. And recommended rules. So here we are saying, oh boy, there we go. Here we are saying that I have made, with these two changes, my parser options. Oh no, I shouldn't have gotten rid of parser. Pardon me. Parser TypeScript dash ESLint slash parser. Here we go. We're saying that the parser is going to be configured with a project. That project means that TypeScript ESLint, when parsing your code, can also build up type information from your code based on that TS config. Then we also enable the recommended rules from TypeScript ESLint that require type checking. They are not in the default recommended rule list because by default there is no type information, but recommended requiring type checking does enable these rules. And some of them are surprisingly powerful. One of my favorite ones is typecasting. Let's say that you allow name to be string or undefined, or even just, let's say name by default equals anonymous. And let's say you have some code that runs if name is defined, and you're like, okay, if name console.log name as string. TypeScript ESLint has a rule that will tell you, hey, this assertion is unnecessary since it does not change the type of the expression. Pardon my mouse. And then you can quick fix using the ESLint extension in your editor, or just ESLint -- fix on the command line. Notice how it does take a little bit longer to build up that type information, and I'll cover this error message in a hot moment, but it does fix it. Very nice. Which reminds me, let's add the ESLint extension to our workspace recommendations. So if we go to our VS Code extensions, we now also get this person's VS Code ESLint. Yay. Add all, status, typed, linting, and extension. Now there's one more error message I want to fix before we're done with type linting. And it's this parsing error, parser options.project has been set, blah, blah, blah. I actually have an open pull request in TypeScript ESLint to improve this error message. But if you ever see it, the thing that it's complaining about is that it's trying to run ESLint on a file that is not included in your TS config. That's an error because there's no type information available for files not in the TS config. So to fix it, you have a few options. One is you could ESLint ignore your CJS file, goes away. The other is you could add it to your TS config, or you could use an override to say only enable parser options, TypeScript ESLint, and so on for your TypeScript files. So star.ts, star in case it's TSX, parser options, and extends. Voila. So now, oops, restart ESLint server. This one I'm not super confident on is the right way. I'm thinking it's complaining about this one still. So personally, I don't spend much time trying to get that to work. I just removed my ESLint file from the list of linted files. There is probably some way to get this to work. Let me know if you find it, because I've found only irritation there. So ignore CJS. Ooh, question from the Q&A. I'm having trouble with one rule in particular. TypeScript ESLint no floating promises error. Fun fact, I wrote the original no floating promises and I feel your pain. It used to be even harder to work with. TypeScript ESLint no floating promises is a very opinionated lint rule. I don't think we have time to cover it now, but please do reach out to me on Twitter or email if you want some help with that. As a rule, it stops floating promises. So promises that aren't handled in some way, like with a .then or an await or a .catch. But oftentimes you may end up just needing to ESLint disable a next line for a floating promise, such as life. Okay, one final thing to cover is running this stuff in CI. The last thing is I'm going to just quickly breeze over these because I wanted to end after about an hour, and it's about an hour. I highly recommend adding a workflow in whatever CI provider you use for each of these commands. And I'll just build one up real quick. Let's add in a GitHub build commands, which will run yarn npm run build. So I'm going to make dir github/workflows touch, oops, I took -p on I make dir, sorry, my Zoom stuff's in the way. Make dir.github, make dir github/workflows touch github workflows build.yaml. There we go. All right, so this will use the latest version of Ubuntu whenever we push to the main branch or send a pull request or commit to a pull request. We'll have a build job that checks out the repo and then uses this GitHub Actions prepare, which I will approximately copy and paste from the repo.github/actions/prepare/action YAML. Does touch have a -p? No, it doesn't. Your -p touch action YAML. I really like having a reusable setup or prepare action, which sets up a repo in CI. Here we have setup node, which does npm install after setting up node with node version 18. So putting these two together, I, in this GitHub workflows build YAML, say to, with the latest version of npm, run the npm run build script. Git commit add build.yaml. And assuming I haven't forgotten anything or left in a reference to yarn or some such, now if we go to the logrocket repo, which I've managed to close somehow, go to the Actions tab, we can see one workflow run from added build.yaml. Very exciting. It's got just the one job, build. Running npm run build, and it passed. Yay, good for us. Since build works, I'm going to get aggressive and also add formats.yaml. Call this format. And I'm going to also add a lints.yaml too. Whoops. Add all, commit and format and lints too. Now I should note actually, format does require another command line flag. Where is it? Oh, I called it prettier in the template repo. I highly recommend -- list different, which will tell it to complain if there are any different things. So let me just go ahead and add that to the YAML. All right. Dash dash list difference. Okay. So at this point, we've pretty much completed the workshop. And I'm going to recap all the things we did because I realized there are a lot of files. First, we added a basic package.json. And actually, let's just go to the commit history to look through those. We added a basic package.json. We added TypeScript as a dev dependency with a TypeScript config. We set our target to ES 2021 so that we don't have to transpile down to old syntax. We set up the package with a main so that it can be run. We configured TypeScript to include source maps and definition files, along with strict true, avoiding the billion-dollar mistake. We added Prettier as a CLI flag, and as a commit hook. We then added ESLint, not as a commit hook, just as a CLI. Then we also enabled ESLint to run with the fancy schmancy powerful TypeScript empowered rules. We then fixed up a CJS complaint with ESLint, and then we added ESLint, TypeScript, and Prettier as CI. Oh, look at this. CI that gets run via GitHub Actions. At this point, our repo is pretty much ready for any sort of TypeScript related changes that might get thrown onto it. Later on, you might want to also add, say, testing or automated releases. And if you do, I'd encourage you to check out this repo, template TypeScript node package. But for now, that's pretty much all I wanted to cover. Thanks, y'all, for listening. And I now open the floor to any other questions or comments y'all wanted to post in the Q&A. And if anyone still has issues with no floating promises and you want to post more specifics, I'd be happy to answer those now.
Thank you so much for the talk, Josh. And thank you, everybody, for your questions. We had a lot today, which was really great. If anyone has any final questions that they'd like to ask Josh, now's the time before he leaves.
I see the question. Parser error project has been set for ESLint parser. This was covered, but I also just want to show a pull request that we will be releasing and a soon released version of TypeScript ESLint. Jack, I just sent to host and panelists, if you don't mind forwarding over. So this PR includes a link to an issue and also much better error messages for that specific complaint. The specific complaint is saying that you've told TypeScript ESLint to run with type information, but there's no type information available for that file because it's not included in your TS config. So my suggestion would be to either include that file in your TS config or just exclude it from linting altogether.
Okay, great. Just a final reminder to everybody watching that we will be sending out a recording of this after the webinar's concluded. I'll be emailing afterwards with a link to our YouTube channel where we'll be uploading, and you can watch it at your convenience again whenever you wish to. Just like to thank Josh once again for joining us for a second time. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you come and deliver another talk for us. And I think we might have one last
question.
Yeah.
I have a question out of this workshop scope, maybe. Well, I have a problem with Prettier extension that it keeps overriding on any setting I put in my VS Code setting file. This is one thing I didn't go over, but could have and arguably should have. ESLint config Prettier. Sorry, Jack, one more thing. npmi save dev ESLint config Prettier. Oftentimes, you will have lint rules from ESLint that conflict with the Prettier settings. ESLint is really, really bad at formatting, and that is not a case that you want to have happen. So you never want to have ESLint rules that conflict with Prettier. Just structurally, ESLint was not made for formatting, so it has a lot of edge cases and it's slow when it's trying to do them. So highly recommend ESLint config Prettier. Add it to your extends list, and then this should never go away, or this should never happen. It should go away. So let's say you accidentally have some ESLint rule that changes whitespace or endlines or something. add the Prettier extends in your ESLint config, and that should go away. If you have other issues with the Prettier extension overriding your VS Code settings file, I would encourage you to email or Twitter at me that one. I can take a look. So I'm actually going to add this command ESLint config Prettier. This is different from ESLint plugin Prettier, which allows you to run Prettier through ESLint, which is slow and I would not recommend. Okay, now we're done, I think.
Okay, once again, just thank you to everybody for your questions. It's just been really great to have that engagement from everybody. And thank you to Josh once again. And thank you for joining us today and wishing everybody a great weekend. Thank you.